And we are live.
Okay, I can start, no? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I am Cristel Obispado from the Department of History. Today, we are happy to see that we have participants coming from Mexico, the Philippines, Spain, Japan, Colombia, China, Indonesia, India, and the United States. Welcome po to the 5th episode of Historia Olvidada, Filipinas-México 2024.
Lakat?
Okay. To our first-time attendees, it is a virtual colloquium series on the historical, cultural, and diplomatic ties between the Philippines and Mexico, organized by the Philippine Embassy in Mexico in partnership with the History Department of the University of the Philippines, El Colegio de San Luis, and the Philippines-Mexico Studies Program of La Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, or UNAM. We are currently being live streamed on the Embassy's YouTube channel. To search on YouTube, just type in at Mexico PE 2023. Before we start, here are some reminders to our attendees. Please listen carefully. Video cameras and microphones of attendees on Zoom should be disabled throughout the program and presentation. During the open forum, you may ask questions or comment. You can state or write your question in the QA or chat box. Attendees are invited to fill out the evaluation forms, which will be posted in the chat box at the end of the session. The evaluation form will be the basis for the issuance of certificates of participation. To start the lecture, we invite Her Excellency Lilibet de Yapera, the Philippine Ambassador to Mexico, for her welcome remarks. Ambassador.
Good evening, good morning to all our participants present in this event, including those who are joining us via YouTube channel. On behalf of the Embassy of the Philippines in Mexico, allow me to express my sincerest gratitude to our distinguished guest speaker for the 5th episode of La Historia Olvidada, Filipinas-México 2024, Professor Sonia Ocaña Ruiz, Professor, History Department of Universidad Juárez, Autónoma de Tabasco, Mexico. She will be presenting on the domestication of Asia Trans-Pacific art objects in 17th century New Spain. I just want to stress to the others who are joining us and who are in YouTube that Professor Ocaña Ruiz is now in Spain, and so it's early morning in Spain, madrugada, or how do you say that? Naku, nakalimutan ko na sa Tagalog. Anyway, so I hope, Professor, that you will bear with us, and I hope that we will really have a successful session tonight or this morning. Once again, I would also like to extend my appreciation to our partners for this virtual colloquium series, especially to Dr. Cristel Obispado of the University of the Philippines, Diliman, who is our host and moderator for tonight's episode. This initiative, as she has mentioned, is with the University of the Philippines, Diliman, El Colegio de San Luis Potosí, correcto? O no? San Luis, Universidad de San Luis. I'm sorry. And the Philippine-Mexico Studies Program based at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, which started in October last year with the aim to highlight pivotal events and contexts that have shaped the engagements between the Philippines and Mexico, spanning from the 16th century to the contemporary period. We would like to invite everyone, if afterwards your friends or your families were not able to attend the session tonight, they can go to the Embassy YouTube so that they may still hear what Professor Anya Luis has to say. And of course, your disadvantage would be that you will not be able to ask the questions that you may think about, but you still can hear what the presentation would be. Without further ado, I would like to welcome you all to the 5th episode of La Historia Olvidada, Filipinas-México 22-24. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po. Muchas gracias a todos. Mabuhay.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. We want to acknowledge the presence of our guests who are in attendance at the Zoom meeting, especially to Francisco de la Cruz Caceres of the Dominican Republic Embassy in Mexico, Ethel Jane Molina of the Embassy of the Philippines in New Delhi, Joyner Zarzuela Nuera of the Philippine Embassy in Singapore, Celia Ana Feria of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Juan Alberto Varela Marquez, Director General de Asuntos Internacionales de México, Dr. Florina Capistrano Baker of Ayala Museum, Magali Hernandez Lopez of Museo de la Ciudad de México, Irma Duchalbi Pointelin of the Museo de la Cultura del Segura, Misty Flores of the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, Dr. Roberto Junco, who's regularly attending our event of the Subdirección de Arqueología Subacuática, Dr. Maria Camacho of the University of Asia in the Pacific. Okay, there's someone who's, I hope we can silence this particular attendee. I think, yeah. Dr. Maria Camacho of the University of Asia in the Pacific, Claudia Salinas Rodriguez of the Secretaría de Cultura de Mexico, and to all our participants, no, most of whom are teachers, students, and art historians. Thank you so much, no, for accompanying us to our today's event. Our speaker, no, for today's lecture obtained her PhD in History of Art from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, UNAM, where she received the Alfonso Caso Award, the highest academic distinction in UNAM, for her dissertation on mother-of-pearl inlaid paintings or encochados. She's a professor in the History Department of the Universidad Juárez Autónoma de Tabasco, Mexico, and a member of the prestigious Mexican Sistema Nacional de Investigadores. She focuses on the study of the artistic relationship between New Spain and Asia, and has extensively published on topics such as encochados, folding screens, and lacquer. She has participated in specialized colloquia in Mexico, US, Spain, Portugal, UK, Belgium, Poland, Singapore, Brazil, and Japan. Her first and forthcoming book, La Domesticación de Asia, Las Relaciones Artísticas Transpacíficas de Nueva España en el siglo XVII, will be launched in the fall of 2024. We are privileged to hear a part of that book today. So let's welcome Dr. Sonia Ocaña Ruiz.
Thank you very much, Dr. Obispado, for this presentation. And thank you very much, Your Excellency and all the organizers. I'm really honored to be here today. So can we please start the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation? Well, as Dr. Obispado said, what I'm sharing today is based on the findings of this forthcoming book. And well, I would like to challenge some old ideas about the circulation of Asian art in New Spain. First would be that New Spain was not a mere stepping point in the Spanish route to Asia. Actually, it was a very large market itself, and people of different social backgrounds and who were living in towns of all sizes in New Spain were avid customers of Asian works of art, some Asian works of art. Yes. And also, well, the fact that New Spain and Asia had a direct and continuous relationship gave place to some kind of familiarization that has been partly deleted, Historia Olvidada, due to the loss of the objects, and also because present-day Mexico and Philippines are not as connected as they used to be. But this relationship that lasted for centuries was really complex, and this means that not everything was about luxury. And of course, I'm dipping on this later. And well, another idea that needs to be reconsidered is that every Asian object in New Spain was considered to be Chinese. This was not really the case. and we are going to see this in the first part of the presentation. And also, I decided to call the book and also the presentation Domestication of Asia, because in 100 years, this is from the late 16th to the late 17th century, some Asian objects went from being unknown, foreign, remote, to being fully integrated into everyday life and domestic assets. And this was possible, and at least this is what I think, because there had been a previous more or less similar process in the early 16th century, when their Native American and European art objects were first integrated in the so-called New World, in Spanish American. And in these processes, there were many social actors that were involved. We are speaking of members of religious orders, but also Spanish who were living in the Americas and were avid to keep their European lifestyle, but also new local elites, and then middle-income people who imitated the upper classes' lifestyles. So please, let's go to the next slide. So this is the map of the Silk Road. This is that the name was not given until the 19th century. And the thing is that, well, as most of us already know, the Europeans had been in touch with the Far East for centuries. By the time that Columbus first came to the Americas. And actually, well, this name Silk Road, I don't think it's really accurate when speaking of this phenomenon that connected the Americas with Asia. The next slide, please. Because by this time, by the 16th century, well, actually silk had been produced in Europe for centuries. So it was not the main, by the 16th century, it was actually very much about the spices. And well, this was one of the main reasons, of course, the economic value of these spices that somehow led this exploring, the next one, please, of a different route to Asia. What they thought that would be the different route. This is a map from the late 15th century. And well, it's not that bad for the 15th century, but you can see that there is no, America, the American continent is not here, because there was no idea. The Americas had been through a history that was totally unrelated to Europe and to Asia and to Africa for centuries. And of course, the next one, please. And the Europeans didn't even know about the existence of this continent. But in this map from the late 18th century, this is a modern map, but it shows that the routes that had been established after the finding of this very large continent, and the fact that it was Manila in the Philippines and Acapulco in New Spain that were connecting for centuries. And you know that this was not the Spanish route, of course, didn't end in New Spain. It ended in Seville in Spain. But anyway, you can see that it was, it was not really, New Spain was much larger than modern Mexico. It was also the south of current US, and actually a very large part of Central America. And this was a large market in, and I am focusing today, of course, on works that have been preserved, but the book and my research are more based upon documentary references to Asian objects. And the thing is that we have this kind of references in Santa Fe, in New Mexico, for example, and in Antequera, which was Oaxaca, and Zacatecas, because we know much of what we know about this phenomena is based in Mexico City and a little bit Puebla, which was also a very important city, somehow Acapulco. But what we are finding now is that the market and the taste for Asian objects was really, even in the late 16th century, in the early 17th century, some works, well, silk, of course, Asian silk, and Chinese porcelain, but also Japanese works were circulating really in different cities. And I think that this really should be stressed, because this means that what we know until now is really just a small part of the puzzle. I mean, it was a very much more significant phenomenon. And okay, let's go to the next one, please. Okay, so we unfortunately don't have any images of what was Tenochtitlan like by the time the Spaniards got for the first time there. We do have, well, some pictures. For example, this was on the right, Seville in the 16th century. But what we know is that these were two foreign worlds. Their histories had not been connected ever before this. But the thing is that the finding of these other cultures left a mark in, everywhere, not everywhere, but of course in Spain, of course in Manila. But where this mark and this transformation was really deep was in Spanish America. The next one, please. And well, we have here two portraits. One is the very famous portrait of Charles V by Tiziano, 1548. And then we have on the Florentine Codex a portrait of Moctezuma in 1569. And of course, they are very different from each other. But anyway, Moctezuma, I don't have time to, and it's not actually the topic of this presentation. But anyway, in the picture, the portrait on the right already shows the kind of changes, the kind of transformation that were already very common in New Spain by the time the route between Manila and Acapulco was established. I mean, the thing is that New Spain had been experiencing this kind of transformations for decades before. The only thing, the next one, please, is that this kind of, it was in the first half of the 16th century, it had to be with connecting two different cultures. And then after the route to Manila, it was not two, but three different cultures. Here we have, well, on the right, the very famous Moctezuma's headdress. And on the left, well, one page of the Florentine Codex, when it is explained how feather work was made. It was a very beautiful kind of work that the Spaniards were very fond of it. And that was the reason, the next one, please. That was the reason why they didn't really ban it, but they transformed it into a new kind of thing. This is what we call plumaria, plumaria novohispana, Mexican colonial feather work. And even though it keeps the use of feather, of beautiful feathers, it's, okay, you can see that these are Catholic depictions, and they are using engravings. I mean, they are, this is different to any European work of this time, but it's very far from the original Mexican feather work. So this is not so different to what happened later with folding screens or enconchados. Please, let's go to the next one. Yes. Okay, so we have, well, this is the kind of scene of the kind of characters that were depicted throughout the centuries in New Spain. And we have on the left the linen of Tlaxcala, which was made before the establishment of the route to Asia. And of course, what we have here is Cortés and La Malinche and the authorities from Tlaxcala. And this doesn't have anything to do with Asia, but then we have a little more than 100 years later, it's one of the many folding screens that in the late 17th century were depicting the meeting of Cortés and Moctezuma. And of course, the very use of a folding screens relates to Asia, because this is well, of course, this kind of work was not known in the Americas until the first Asian folding screens started circulating. But anyway, by this time, I mean, it was almost 100 years after the first folding screens first got here. And you can see that except for the very shape, I mean, the very kind of furniture, all of the rest of the work is totally different to any Asian folding screens. So this is the kind of works that I call like domesticated Asian works that are taken into a very different direction. And the thing is that New Spain was not the only place where Asian folding screens circulated in the late 16th and early 17th century, but it was the very first place out of Asia when they became really popular. There was a local taste that was quickly developed, and the first experimentations in this kind of now non-Hispanic folding screens started at least in the 1620s. They might have started even earlier, but the solid evidence dates from the 1620s. Let's go to the next one, please. Okay, just for the record, I mentioned a few minutes ago. Okay, about silk. Silk was not a very important, well, not the most important kind of Asian work for the Europeans by this time, but anyway, it was actually talking about products, it was the most important in quantity in the New World, because there were European textiles in New Spain, which were usually of high quality and they were expensive. And when it comes to Asian silk, it was, I mean, of course, it could be very expensive. It could be of very, very good quality, but it was really, really diverse. And this topic, I'm not discussing it, well, not in the book and not in this presentation. It has been discussed by other authors, and I particularly recommend Mariano Bonalian's work on the use of silk, and also he demonstrates how cheap silk could be sometimes in the Americas. So let's go to the next one, please. And anyway, this is a proof that there were some Asian silks, in this case from Macau, that was made especially for the Iberian market. And this is, well, this is a very, very early work because it is dated in the second half of the 16th century. Of course, this one was made by order, and this is one of the few examples that we have of this time of top quality works. And now let's go to the next one, please. I'm going to start speaking of two different kinds of works from Japan. And I mentioned before that not everything was considered to be Chinese. Actually, in documents from the 17th century, especially from the first half of the 17th century, we do have a number of mentions to Japanese works that do say that they are Japanese. And this is because, well, there was not regular trade between Japan and New Spain, but okay, there were already trade networks in Asia by the time when the Europeans first got here. So there was a trade, a regular trade between Manila and Nagasaki, and this is one of the reasons, I mean, one of the main reasons why there were so many, well, relatively so many Japanese works in New Spain from the very beginning of the regular trade from the 1570s in New Spain. Let's go to the next one, please. This is a well-known quote from Antonio de Morga's Events in the Philippine Isles, Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. And well, he was in Manila between 1595 and 1603. And he's speaking of this time that he spent there. And he said that there were merchandise shipped from Nagasaki to Manila, and they included, I'm just reading the ones that I am particularly interested here, handsomely framed biobos decorated with oil paintings and gold leaf, and also small wooden boxes covered with lacquer and decorated with various patterns. And well, let's go to the next one, because it's interesting that he doesn't say much about what these, he doesn't mention what were the topics that were depicted on these screens. And this is something that we find also in non-Hispanic references. They never, well, the ones that I know a few dozens, and they never mention the topics. All they say is that these Japanese folding screens were golden or were gilded. So, well, there's a kind of artistic production mainly related to the export market in Japan, Namban art. Namban is the word that the Japanese used to name the southern barbarians, which is the Europeans, mainly the Portuguese and the Jesuits, but there were also Spaniards and non-Hispanic, and a few Italians and other religious Catholic orders. But the thing is that, well, what specialists believe is that Namban folding screens started in the early 17th century. But Morga is referring to a dynamics that was already happening in the late 16th century. That suggests, in my opinion, that the first folding screens that were known in New Spain were not meant for the sport market, that were not the Namban works, but these ones made for the domestic market. This is the Momoyama period in Japan. And this was a very popular kind of depiction by this time, the birds and flowers of the four seasons. And you can see that, well, you have this kind of decorative painting that, because it is depicting flowers and birds and vegetable motifs, it doesn't necessarily look so foreign. But what is really like appealing for a spectator in the New World is the very relevant use of the golden color. And this is what the written sources of the time are always referring to, that they are golden. So let's go to the next one, please. And this is about Japanese lacquer. The next one, well, another click, please. Yes, so lacquer, which was Chinese in origin, had achieved a very high quality by the time the Europeans first got in Japan. So on the left, we have domestic Momoyama kind of lacquer. And you can see that it has a black background, and also it's, the word used, maquillé, it relates to the fact that it's like, it has gold that is sprinkled to make the figures. And you have some flowers and motifs, And it had a very high reputation in this time, Japanese lacquer. But then the Europeans very early started asking for the kind of adaptations that they had. I mean, as a phenomenon, it is not so different to what happened in the Americas decades before this. I mean, they did like feather work, but they adjust the works and ask for adaptations that led to a different kind of objects. And when they got interested in Japanese lacquer, they first they wanted a different kind of objects and furniture, because the objects that were used in Japan at this time were very different to the ones in Europe. And also you can see that Namba lacquer has a mother of pearl inlays that were not common in the Momoyama period. And they, in turn, please let's go to the next one, they relate to other works that the Europeans had previously seen in other parts of Asia, and namely, on the left, you have in the Portuguese lacquer that is a little earlier. It was made, and there are not so many works have been preserved, but they did use, they had black backgrounds, and they use mother of pearl inlays. So it is believed that the Europeans not only ask for different kind of objects, but they also ask for this kind of mother of pearl inlays precisely because they were very fond of them. So the next one, please. And well, here we have other, and you can see that these are not Namban lacquer, these are Asian lecterns that are were more or less made at the same time, or they might be a little bit later, but not so much later than the Japanese ones. And another click, please. And these are lecterns. At least the two on the right are related to the Jesuit order that was very important and strong, especially in Japan. And the reason why I'm showing you all of these works is because, well, sometimes it's really difficult to know what exactly the documentary references are meaning, because they don't always offer so much information, and even when they do, we cannot be very sure of their accuracy. But it is likely that not only the Japanese, but also these other that are thought to be, well, for example, the second from the left, it is very likely that it was made in Macau in the early 17th century. And the next one might have been made, it's not very sure, but might have been made in India. And we also know that some Indian objects were made, were exported to New Spain. So the thing is that, of course, as researchers, we always want to have the more accurate and the more precise information we can. It is not always possible, but I think that it's fascinating because there are not so many works like the ones on this slide, but we should be aware that they existed, and when a document refers to a Chinese lectern, for example, in a reference from the 1630s, for example, in New Spain, it is very likely that it refers to a Japanese work, but it might also be referring to these other that are, somehow related, but they are not Japanese. And let's go to the next one, please. Well, these are two portraits of Tsunenaga Hasekura, who was a samurai that was sent by the daimyo Date Masamune in the well-known Keisho embassy that went to Spain, and they also met the Pope, but they went through New Spain. And they came 2 times to New Spain, in their way to Europe, and they on their way back. And well, there is one reference to the past of these embassies in the diary of oh my God, I can't remember the name now. Chimalpain, who was a man writing in the Aztec language, and it was a big impression, of course. They caused a big impression to people who saw them in Mexico City. And the thing is that they did have some objects, because one of the reasons, I mean, it was actually somehow a Catholic mission, but they also wanted to trade with New Spain, because they knew in Japan that some Japanese works were very popular in New Spain. So we don't have a record of what the objects they brought, but undoubtedly they must have included lacquer and well, very likely a few folding screens too. So let's go to the next one, please. And okay, these two escritoires are from the style is what is called transitional style, because they are dated more or less in the 1640s. And what is interesting here is that by this time, the Catholic had been expelled from Japan, and Japan had closed itself off. And the Namban lacquer production had come to an end, and officially the trade with the Europeans was controlled by the Dutch, who were Protestant and were the enemies of the Spanish crown. But anyway, I mean, there are very, very few Japanese lacquer in today Mexico. And actually, there are very few works that we can know for sure that have stayed in Mexico since this time. And these two, I think that it is very, very likely that they have been for centuries there, because they were acquired in Puebla in the early 20th century by a collector, Da Bello, who, well, he was not, we don't have written records of everything that he bought, but most of the objects that he bought, he did he bought them in Puebla or in Mexico City, and these were not like very trendy in early 20th in the early 20th century in Puebla. So that's why I think that they had stayed there for centuries. And in documents, in documentary references, we can see something similar, because we have a few documents from the 1640s that name different kinds of Japanese lacquer, and just in one or two cases, they do say that this is a new work, and we're speaking of the 1640s. So they must be referring to works similar to these ones. So the thing is that even though we could expect that Japanese works stopped circulated after Japan closed itself off, what we see in written references is that, well, of course, there were fewer objects, but they continued to come to New Spain. So let's go to the next one, please. We have here a portable altar containing a Catholic depiction. This is in Museo Nacional de Artes Decorativas in Madrid, and the painting that it contains was made in the Americas. And well, you can see these were very popular, and we also have written references of their circulation in New Spain in the 1630s and 1620s. And well, of course, they were very, I mean, these were of higher quality, most of them, and they were actually, I mean, we can consider this the kind of works that were related to luxury. And let's go to the next one, please. And this is a very similar work, which has an interesting history because, well, it contains a Virgin of Guadalupe, a Mexican Virgin of Guadalupe, and the painting itself dates from the 18th century, and it was sent in the late 18th century to New Spain, but they were already together. And the thing is that, well, even though it's actually now in Mexico, it has come back to Mexico, but anyway, it was present. I mean, the Japanese original work was from the most likely from the very early 17th century. And more than 150 years after that, someone in New Spain considered that this was a high-level work present to be sent to Spain, but now with these like no-Hispanic images that would be considered, like a no-Hispanic present. So this means that even, I mean, so many years after this work had been made, it was already, it continued to be appreciated in New Spain. And we cannot be sure that by the late 18th century, the person who sent it as a gift to Spain knew about the Japanese origin of the original work, but it didn't matter. I mean, they did like it and they considered that it was a good present. And let's go to the next one, please. And well, we don't have so many, as I mentioned, Namban lacquer pieces in New Spain, well, from New Spain, but we have a very good proof that this kind of Namban lacquer pieces were familiar enough to inspire a different kind of artistic production, which is now known as enconchado. This is a term from the late 20th century. There were many original different names. None of them was enconchado, but enconchado is a short one, so it's easy to remember. And well, these are paintings that were made in the late 17th century and early 18th century in New Spain. It was painters that were involved in the making of enconchados, so technically they are totally unrelated to Namban lacquer. They were made, enconchados, with pictorial techniques of Western origin that were adapted to create effects similar to those of lacquer, but you have to focus on the frames to see more clearly the relationship with Japanese lacquer. And well, frames were actually important in New Spain. We usually don't consider them, but anyway, they were in many works important part of the pieces. But the case of enconchados is very particular because these kind of frames are found once and again related to this kind of paintings. And we don't have this kind of frames related to other paintings. And also you can see that the figures, the repertoire is very similar to in different works. They have black backgrounds filled with flowers, birds, and leaves, and sometimes other kind of figures, and they are painted in gold, sometimes with red touches, but they have a mother of pearl. And even though the figures are, I mean, it's just a few kind of figures, the solutions are very different in every case. So they were conceived individually and taken very seriously, and they were made in the same workshops that made the paintings. Let's go to the next one, please. And well, we don't know, we cannot be sure actually about the first stages of enconchados, but I think that these two works here can offer some clues about what might have been the first stages of the development of enconchados. And it is especially interesting, the lectern on the left. It is in Salamanca, in Spain. And well, the first to call attention to the existence of this piece is Dr. Yayoi Kawamura. And you can see, well, actually the technique of this work has not been studied. I think that it might well have been made with painting techniques in, well, most likely in New Spain, and they are offering solutions that are similar, that recall Japanese lacquer, but anyway, they are including some features that are foreign to such lacquer. For example, you can see a painting work, an image, in the central part of the lectern, and this is foreign to any number lacquer that we know. And actually, the quality of the work itself seems to be simpler than Japanese originals. But the person, the unknown artist that made this piece, is very likely to have to make it having seen a Japanese original work, to copy it, or to, well, not copy so accurately, but to make a work that really recalled the other pieces, was much closer, the one on the left, than Enconchados, for example. Here on the right, you have a Virgin of Guadalupe. It's also in Spain. It was sent probably as a gift, most likely in the early 18th century. And well, this is a Virgin of Guadalupe with the apparitions, the 4 apparitions, according to the Guadalupe's iconography. And you can also see this advanced ornamentation that is related to enconchado frames. But in this case, this is not a frame, but the ornamentation is really essential to this work. And this must have been required by the patron that ordered this work. So this confirms that it is not mother of pearl itself that defines an enconchado. What customers were asking was this kind of decoration that by this time, late 17th century, well, I personally believe that most customers by this time didn't really know that this kind of ornamentation was originally fueled by the Japanese works. I think that by this time, they already, more or less like the biombos, they consider a particular kind of work that was, like made in New Spain, and they like it. I mean, it was already domesticated. So let's go to the next one, please. Okay, this is the one. Another click, please. And in the center, we have the work, the cabinet in Museo Bello that I mentioned before. But it was not only people in the Americas that were developing new kind of works inspired by Asian originals. The Europeans were also doing something similar, but in a very different way. On the right and the left, we have 2 cabinets made by Gerard Dagley, who was a Flemish lacquer worker working in Berlin. And he was a very, very skilled artist. And well, that technique of Japanese lacquer could not be made in anywhere far out of Asia, but this time. But Dagley was more or less like in Enconchados, with very different materials and techniques. He was developing similar effects. And it is, well, the one on the right is not meaning to copy a Japanese original, because it is white. And it was, the white lacquer was preferred in Europe, and well, it seems that most white lacquers of this time were European. But the one on the left is a good example of how accurately Dagley could copy the effects of Japanese techniques, and this is because his patron had a good collection of Japanese lacquers. So by this time, I mean, sometimes this is called the early globalization, there were people in all, well, not in all, but in the three continents, in Asia, in the Americas, and Europe, who were really, really fond of this kind of new works that had been made very, very far away, and they were ordering local artists similar works. But what is really interesting is that, especially in New Spain in the 17th century, it seems that they were not really trying to copy, to imitate very faithfully the Asian originals, but they were already from the beginning transforming them into something different, which is what they had been doing, as I mentioned, since the early 16th century with works like featherwork. Next one, please. Okay, yes, this is, well, this is actually my favorite enconchado. It's a Virgin of Guadalupe, which was also sent to Spain in the early 18th century. And you have on the right some details from the frame. You can see that the painting itself is really, really, I mean, it's a very beautiful skill work, but the frame has received as much attention as the painting. And you have, for example, butterflies. Yes, next one, please. The next one we have, next one. We have a detail from the painting itself. And you can see this mosaic-like ensemble, you know, of the mother of pearl. And this is a very, very specialized work. And of course, the patron, we don't know who he was, but no doubt the patron paid a very good amount of money because this is made very, very carefully, more carefully than most enconchados. So in this case, if you pay attention to the picture, to the painting itself, there is nothing that really, really closely follows Japanese lacquer. But if you pay attention to the frame, then you can see this inspiration. It's not a copy, but this inspiration of the Japanese original work. Next one, please. So now we have on the right the folding screen, the Momoyama folding screens, the screen that I had already shown you, the birds and flowers of the four seasons. And then on the right, we have a folding screen, and a Hispanic one from the late 17th century that is in the Sumaya collection in Mexico City, and it's called the birds folding screens. And well, this is one, this is what I believe. The one on the left dates from the late 16th century. So there's a gap of 100 years between both works. And there is, I mean, of course, the one on the right is far much, well, I was going to say far much simpler. No, the one on the left, the Japanese one, is not simple at all. The one on the right is. We don't know who is the artist, but no doubt he was not a very skilled artist. But anyway, you have the golden clouds that we find very often in Novo-Hispanic folding screens from that 17th century. And we also have birds. And for example, we have the ones on the top and on the left that they are, you know, like falling down. And this is, okay, we do have paintings, other kind of non-Hispanic paintings that include flowers or birds, but the solutions are very different to the ones in these folding screens. So what I think is that it is very likely that in the first decades of the 17th century, there were different American-made folding screens that were, well, using figures similar to the Japanese models, but the connection with the Japanese original sources must have been lost by the time the unknown painter of the following screen on the right made this work. So I cannot affirm it, but anyway, you do have some documentary references from the early 18th century that seem to be describing works similar to the one on the right. And the way they describe them suggests that the appraiser and the patron have no idea about the similarities with the Japanese works. But I think that if you see both of them together, well, very vaguely, but I do think that it is some kind of relationship. And of course, the clouds, well, in that case, it is out of discussion. These clouds definitely come from Japanese models. Let's go to the next one, please. And we have three other very well known. I think that many of you might already know them. The two on the left are in the Museo de América in Madrid. They are, well, the one on the top, Palacio de los Virreyes. It is believed that it was made in the 1650s, and there are some missing leaves, actually. And the one on the bottom is from the late 17th century. And well, the one on the right is now in Rodrigo Rivero Lake's collection in Mexico City, but it was made for the Viceroy Marquis of Cadereyta, who was in New Spain from 1635 to 1640. We don't know for sure if it was the Viceroy himself who ordered the work or it was a gift. But anyway, we can be sure that it was made between 1635 and 1640. And it's interesting because this Viceroy also had 8 different Japanese, well, Japanese or Japanese-like Asian, definitely Asian folding screens, and they are described very differently to this one. And you can see that except for the clouds, there is nothing in this work that recalls clearly the Japanese models. So, and this is a man who could afford and who had Japanese folding screens. But when it came to non-Hispanic works, he was looking for something different. So these kind of folding screens were not necessarily a low-cost substitute for Asian originals. I think that already in the 1630s, even, you know, people who came from Spain, like this Viceroy, were already considering that this kind of folding screens related directly to New Spain. Actually, that seems there are some missing leaves here too. But anyway, the buildings that are depicted here belong to Mexico City, who was, well, that's the city where he was living on, the nation he was ruling. So let's go to the next one, please. And well, this is a very well-known piece for Mexican spectators. It is called the Flute Folding Screen. It is in the Sumaya collection. And well, in Mexico, there is no one who thinks that it was made in Mexico. You can see that this is very, very different to the Mexican pieces, the non-Hispanic pieces in the past slide. But anyway, this is not Japanese either, even though you can see the golden clouds. And well, the thing is that it is likely that this work was made by artists that were familiar with Japanese folding screens, but it is likely that this was made in Macau, and there were some Japanese artists close to the Catholic orders that were that went to Macau after Christendom was banned in 1614 in Japan. And from documents, we can be almost sure that this kind of works circulated in New Spain. This piece was acquired in Spain, so it didn't remain through the centuries in Mexico. But documents, as I mentioned before, sometimes we have some references from the 1670s, 1680s, and the early 18th century. I mean, very late dates for Japanese folding screens, but they describe works that seem to be somehow related to the Japanese ones. So what I guess is that very likely these pieces had a good market in Mexico, in colonial Mexico. Next one, please. And also pieces like this one that are not very common. There are very few folding screens like this. This is in Chicago, and it's thought to be Chinese, Portuguese, probably made in Macau. And once again, from the asset inventories of viceroys, I mean, inventories that are already made in Spain, but they belong to people who spent years in a very high position in New Spain, and they describe works that seem to be very similar to the ones here. So it is very likely that they were acquired in New Spain. Next one, please. Well, this is only as a reference. This is a Chinese Coromandel folding screen, and the boom of these pieces in New Spain was actually in the early 18th century, but there are some written references even in the 1670s. So this is because, well, actually Chinese lacquer screens circulated in New Spain may have been a little different because there are, I mean, I only know one case that explicitly refers to the relief that is typical of Coromandel folding screens. It seems that the Chinese lacquer screens that were circulated in New Spain were a little different. I think that since there was already a very large market for Asian folding screens by that time, I think it is very likely that some works were especially made for this market. And some of them were, I mean, 2B folding screens, Chinese folding screens, were relatively inexpensive. And some others, of course, were very expensive. So let's go to the next one, please. Yes, the next slide. Yes.
Yeah, just a minute.
I think we are in that 32 or something like that. Yes, 33. Thank you. So, well, I mentioned before that very likely Japanese folding screens circulated in New Spain were Momoyama domestic folding screens, but there's no doubt that the Namban folding screens related to the Portuguese and the Jesuits also circulated locally. And what you can see, well, on the left, you have a work that is now in Museo Nacional de Arte Antigua in Lisbon, but on the right, you have a detail of the mural painting, The Great Martyrdom of Japan in 1697. And it's in well, now it's the Cuernavaca Cathedral. It used to be the Franciscan convent in Cuernavaca. And what you can see is the shape of the boats, and also, well, maybe the image is not clear enough, but also the details of the clothing of the characters. So, well, this is just a guess, But it is believed that this work was made in the early 1620s, that is just a few years after the coming of the embassy, the Japanese embassy. So this might suggest that at least a few number folding screens were brought by this embassy. So let's go to the next one, please. Okay, so now we're going to speak of Chinese porcelain. Next one, please. Well, just to indicate the next one, please. Yes, more clicks. These are the production centers of Chinese porcelain of this time. And this is, well, I think Dr. Junco is over here. And I am taking this from one of his articles with Dr. Fournier. And they have found many shreds of Chinese porcelain in many, many different places in former New Spain. Let's go to the next one, please. And well, you have here on the left one Chinese porcelain dish that was found in Acapulco, and then on the right a piece with a similar, more or less similar design with deers that was recovered from the San Diego shipwreck in 1600. And let's go to the next one, please. Anyway, these works widely circulated in Europe too, and they inspired European ceramics as well. For example, you have these Spanish works made in Talavera de la Reina in the 17th century, and you can see that the figures, the deers, are very similar to the Chinese models. And let's go to the next one, please. It is not only about the designs or the use of white backgrounds with blue figures that distinguishes Chinese porcelain circulated in New Spain, but also the shapes of some vessels were used in New Spain, especially in Puebla, Losa de Puebla, sometimes considered, next one please. Sometimes it is referred to as Talavera Poblana, but this is not, I mean, it was not Talavera. I mean, the identification with Talavera was considered in the 20th century. So in this time, this, next one, please. By this time, it was just considered to be Losa de Puebla. And I am taking these two pictures from Meja Brilladarshini. And you can see on the left a Chinese porcelain work. And on the right, you have one made in New Spain, which has a very similar shape. And also, like this author says, the decoration borrows elements from the jar shape, such as the division into 4 distinct parts. We are seeing only 2 here. And also top and bottom scrolls. So this is the clues that Chinese models were partly inspiring the Poblano work. Next one, please. Okay, you have on the left a jar that was made for the order of St. Augustine in the late 16th century, I mean very, very early in this era. And then you have on the right a model made in Puebla. Not every, next one please, not every ceramic made in Puebla was inspired, next one please, by Chinese models, but we do have, this cannot be, well, at least I have not been able to find this in documents because written references of this time just mention local losa, local ceramics, and they hardly ever are explicit that they are from Puebla. I mean, if they are from China, they say from China. If they are local, they don't say anything. They just name the object and they do not describe the object. But if we see these pictures, it is clear that they are partly being inspired by this kind of Chinese porcelain. Next one, please. And well, this is a detail of a poblano dish. And okay, I am referring generally to the 17th century, but I think this is worth mentioning. This is from the poblano detail, from the early 18th century, and you can see that the buildings depicted here are more or less familiar with the ones on the left and right, and this comes from an English treatise of Japaning. I mean, this is not meant for makers of ceramics, but for people who are making European lacquers. But anyway, I have little doubt that there were other works in the early 1700s that were not only, next one please, not only copying Chinese original models, but also European ones inspired by the Chinese originals. Next one, please. Okay, so we have on the left poblano work. It's called al lebrillo, and the other one, the one on the right, is a Chinese one, but it's made for a European market. And for example, the shape of the dish itself is based on European models. What I am meaning here is that unlike what we see in biombos and enconchados, which is a more direct relationship with Asian models, the case of losa poblana is more complex because, next one please, because Chinese porcelain was very widely circulating in Europe and was being widely imitated in Europe as well. For example, in this work made in Savona, in Italy, in the 1677, you can also see some back resemblance to Chinese porcelain. Next one, please.
Dr. Ocaña, I'm so
Yes.
sorry, we only have limited time.
Yes, perfect.
You have 1 or 2 minutes to wrap up. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Yes. So, yes. So we are now going to the questions, or well, you tell me.
I think there are still some interesting slides, especially the last one. Last ones, Dr. Ocaña, can you please show?
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, this is well, again, a European, a Dutch ceramics inspired in that 17th century by Chinese porcelain. So next one, please. And this is the proof that not all the porcelain that circulated in 17th century New Spain was cracked porcelain, this white with the blue figures, which was mainly meant for the sport market. But also you have these different works that seem not, these were of higher quality and were not, it seems, so widely imitated precisely because there were not so many pieces. This was more related to an upper class consumption. Next one, please. Okay, and also very few, but we do have proof that Japanese porcelain circulated in 17th century New Spain. There's a very interesting reference from Zacatecas, which in North New Spain, it's from the 1650s, and it mentions two divorce, and they were really, really expensive. They must have been of very high quality, and well, very exceptionally, but these very luxurious works were circulated already in the 17th century, in the mid 17th century. Next one, please. Okay, and this is the archaeological proof of this kind of circulation from the second half of the 17th century. And next one, please, which I think that is the last one. Okay, this is in Museo Nacional del Virreinato. It is from the first half of the 18th century. So, well, just to close this presentation, we have to study every case separately because it's not, I mean, it's very different what you can conclude when you are studying Japanese lacquer or Japanese folding screens or Chinese porcelain. But anyway, they inspired so many different, they circulated in so many places, and the prices and qualities must have been so different, and they inspired so many different works that I think that I mean, there's more research to be done in the next in the coming years. And well, I mean, maybe I can show you the last three. Please, the next one. Okay, these are ivories, ivory plaques, and that are very closely related to the Philippines. And the one on the left was recovered from the wreck of the Santa Margarita in 1601, and the one on the right is in the Victoria and Albert Museum. And let's go, they are very similar, as you can see. They started to be made very early, and I have found many more written references than I expected. And also, very often, they were, at least the ones in New Spain, they were already framed with, I can't, ebano? How do you say ebano? I can't remember now. This kind of timber.
Ebony.
Sorry?
Ebony.
Ebano? Okay.
Ebony. Ebano,
Okay.
ebony.
Ebony, thank you. Thank you. The next one, please. And okay, the one on the left in Museo Nacional del Virreinato, and the one on the right was is from Puebla, the Cathedral of Puebla, and I should thank this picture to Dr. Díaz Calleros and Dr. Pablo Amador. And and the next one, please. And this last one is very interesting because it's in the Asian Civilizations Museum in Singapore, but it was decorated in New Spain. So this is the last topic of the book. I'm sorry that I didn't have enough time to speak more about this one, but I do in the coming book. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sonia Ocaña. I think everyone will agree here, what a fascinating lecture you've just given us. If there's a venue, I think we can listen to your talk in the next 8-10 hours. Unfortunately, we don't have that time, but thank you so much. In the previous episodes, we discussed how the Spanish and Asia Pacific became important spaces for the circulation and encounter of people, trade goods, and food, among other things. For example, one of our speakers, Dr. Cuauhtemoc Villamor, talked about how the Spanish monarchy used Baroque to bring together its diverse territories and manifested in church architectures and other fancy buildings. In the end, what was created was a Baroque was a Baroque style and culture shaped by Trans-Pacific crossing. Today, a related topic, Dr. Ocaña's lecture centered not only on the circulation of objects such as lacquer, screen, lectern, porcelain, but also their domestication, the domestication of Asian and European objects in New Spain, roughly equivalent for our Latin American students, roughly equivalent to Mexico, Peru, Central America, and other parts. So we can only imagine what goods were brought by the galleons and how the Pacific crossing really transformed into a venue for different spaces and processes that make up what we call global. Here are the key points highlighted by Dr. Ocaña. Sorry, I only have a few minutes now. I think it won't do justice to your presentation, but the key takeaway we have first for general consumption, these goods are not only for the elite but for general consumption. So elite and the general population, the objects that circulated via the Pacific crossing were not limited to luxurious items but also included the domestic and everyday objects. And if I understand correctly, it seems that domesticating these objects ironically also means globalizing the taste and consumption because they were made with techniques, combined techniques now from Europe, Asia, and Novo Hispano to adapt to the preferences of consumers from different parts of the world. But I won't take the time. No? I think everybody's excited to ask questions, so we will open the floor for your questions. You can raise your hand or type in your questions in our chat box. Or I can start reading the questions sent to us earlier while you're... Okay, so yeah, let's read some of the questions sent to us. Okay, the first question, I teach the course Area Studies, Southeast Asia. And I expect this lecture to amplify the conceptualization of area itself. So the question is, how do artifacts or objects from the New World construct that world, and what is new for the old world? Okay, so yeah, let me repeat the question. How do objects from the New World construct that world? You know, so I think what gives specific qualities, no, for what we call new world, and then what is new for the old world?
Well, I think that somehow there were many new things for most actors involved, you know, because also there, I mean, even though Chinese porcelain was being exported in very large quantities, it was adapted to foreign taste. I mean, not all of it, but to many pieces, maybe most pieces were adapted to foreign taste. And something similar can be said of Namban lacquer and, well, maybe Japanese folding screens, and of course, Filipino ivories. So, and then also the Mexican colonial and the European, well, actually también also in South America, I didn't mention those cases, but the kind of works that were locally, and when I say locally, I mean locally in different places in the Americas and locally in different places in Europe, all of these were new works. And I think that this is, I mean, it's interesting to me how they become familiar, but anyway, I mean, especially if we are speaking of New Spain in the late 16th century, many things were new, because even those objects that came from pre-Columbian time had changed. They were already changing, and they were being used by people whose everyday life was different. I mean, they were eating different things, and they were, you know, like practicing a new religion, and maybe it wasn't considered to be new any longer by the late 16th century. So what I think is that, I mean, if you consider the Americas, current Mexico, in the early 16th century and then in the early 17th century, is a totally different story. And not everything, of course, that was new came from Asia, but much more than we think came from Asia. And especially, well, silk and Chinese porcelain, they were really, really familiar. More from earlier.
Yeah. Ambassador, do you have pera? You have a question?
No, it's actually not a question, but a comment that it's really unfortunate that we have a limited time because the last pieces that Dr. Ocaña presented, the ivory pieces, it would have been interesting to hear how the artisans
Yes.
in the Philippines were able to fashion the ivory figures
Yes.
and that kind of thing. I don't know if you have materials or sources that says okay, because we are 7,600 islands, and I would imagine
Yes.
which part of the Philippines would the artisanals came from, you know?
Yes.
Uh,
This
I,
is a special. Sorry, please.
go ahead, please.
Well, this is especially fascinating and especially challenging at the same time topic because, well, as I mentioned, on my primary sources in Mexico, well, the thing is that fortunately we do have many pieces that have been preserved. And I mean, not so many as in the case of Chinese porcelain, but there are a few dozens of Filipino Christian ivories from the 17th century that have undoubtedly stayed in Mexico. And and I have also been, studying written references. And the thing is that again, written sources are not very specific. And the thing is that there are not too many, but it is very likely that there were a few ivory pieces that came from Europe. Just a few, but you have to consider that this was also happening. And it also seems that not very often, but from time to time, the tusk, that the name is tusk, right?
Elephants.
A complete elephant tusk was sometimes coming to the Americas too. So a few ivories might have been made in New Spain. So if you have all of this in mind, how can you guess when you have the document which piece came from where? Because something very interesting here is that in the case of ivories, they were very, very seldom said to be Chinese or from the Philippines. It's funny, not funny, but it's interesting because in the other cases, Asian origin is usually mentioned, but in the case of ivories, it is not mentioned. Anyway, I am totally sure that most of these pieces came from the Philippines. But also, we cannot know for sure who were making them. I mean, some of them, no doubt, by Chinese artists working in Parian, right? But very well, it seems that already by the mid 17th century, there were Filipino artists that were also involved in the making of these pieces, and maybe even earlier. But in this case, I think that we, know that to have more accurate answers, definitely we should continue this research together. I mean, because in the Philippines, there are some pieces of the puzzle, and in Mexico, we have other pieces of the puzzle. So I look forward to continue this research with colleagues from the Philippines.
Thank you.
Okay. I think Dr. Roberto Junco has a comment.
Okay.
Would you like to?
Oh, hi, Crystal. No, I just wanted to say that it was a wonderful presentation. Congratulations to Dr. Sonia. And I completely agree with what she said. I think there were different quantities and qualities of these Asian objects that reached most sectors of Novo Hispano society. And I just loved her presentation. Thank you so much. Just a small comment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Junco.
Okay. We will read a question from Henry Lopez. Para la doctora Sonia, quiero saber si usted tiene alguna preferencia de arte en particular.
Oh, it's a very hard question. But, well, anyway, my first scholar love was Enconchados. So it might continue to be, it's my longest scholar love. So maybe if I'm forced to choose, maybe Enconchados. But I love everything I was speaking about.
Okay, next question. When it comes to art, is there any relevant Filipino influence in some parts of Mexico where the trading occurred?
And speaking of objects, I didn't understand
Objects,
the
yeah,
last
yeah,
part.
objects.
Yes. I really hope I will have a better answer for this question within 5 to 10 years, because there are a few references. I mean, it seems that sometimes when sources say Chinese, they mean Filipino, right?
Yeah.
But also, well, for example, another thing that is urgent to do is to work on more documentary sources from the Spanish elite in Manila, because they are usually much more accurate when they refer to the origin of the pieces. For example, in the sources in Manila, I mean, those that are related to governors or to bishops or archbishops, they don't only say that something comes from China, but they sometimes say where in China. And sometimes, well, for example, I know a reference is from the late 18th century. It's the 1778 or something like that. And I mean, it really drives me crazy because it mentions a lacquer piece from La Laguna in the Philippines. So I didn't know about the making of lacquer pieces in the Philippines. And this is late. But anyway, I do think that the more well, I get familiar, or we get familiar with these sources, the more we will be able to understand well, the involvement of Philippine artists. Well, also it seems that some folding screens were made in the Philippines. I mean, if you ask me now, I could affirm that some folding screens were made there. The thing is that I couldn't tell at this stage of research what were the features. For example, if some of these pieces that we think that were made in Macau, it is not impossible that some of them were made in Manila. But I don't have enough information at this moment as to affirm it. But please ask me back within a few years.
Yeah, I will read the last question and then we will have photo ops. So we request the attendees, so please stay for the photo ops, no? It's always a pleasure. Here's the last question. It's always a pleasure to listen to Dr. Ocaña. Thank you for your amazing presentation. I'm eager to get your book as soon as it's released. We are all excited to read your book. My question is, in the case of Novo-Hispanic painting with visible Asian influence, would it be feasible to think in porcelain as a source of inspiration for, say, birds and flowers? Thank you so much.
It may be. I mean, what I think is that I mean, especially in the second half of the 17th century, you know, these relationships became more complex. And in the 18th century, they are really, really complex because it's also about chinoiserie and chapaning at a large scale. But anyway, well, Dr. Monica Coplin, who's a specialist in lacquer world, Asian lacquer and European lacquer, she has identified, but a little different, because sometimes Asian lacquer was a source of inspiration for European porcelain, because lacquer in general was considered to be more luxury than porcelain, because there were many, many thousands of porcelain pieces, and lacquer was a little more exclusive in general. So it was, you know, like it was more usual that you had like the highest considered kinds of work to be imitated or to become a source of inspiration for simple works. But anyway, I mean, we should continue. I mean, looking more carefully. In this case, this approach is more based on documentary research. But in the coming future, I plan to pay more attention to the objects themselves.
Thank you, Dr. Sonia, for this very important lecture. We will now go to photo ops. So please, can you, if you can turn on your camera just for a few seconds for our photo ops.
Okay, we'll do the first panel. 1, 2, 3. Please open your cameras. One more. Last one. Thank you.
Okay, maybe call on Vice Consul Marisa Winkler for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Cristil, and thank you, Dr. Kanya. That's very interesting. And thank you to all our participants. We hope to have you again in our next episode in July, on July 19. And we will have a very interesting topic also. It will be about the Murillo Velarde map, 18th century, traces of a shared cultural landscape, Mexico, Philippines. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Have a good day in the Philippines.
Again, thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you, Dr. Sonia Ocaña. Hope to see you soon.
Doctora.
Thank you so much. To our attendees, don't forget to fill out the evaluation form for your certificate of attendance. Thank you, Dr. Sonia. I know it's I think it's 3 o'clock, 3:30 right now in Madrid. So we're really grateful, no, for this for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much, because this is sort of a good exam to me, because I'm about to finish the book now. I am planning to finish it within a couple of weeks. So this was it was a great opportunity to see, well, if it made sense, and I hope it did.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
May I say, Dr. Ocaña, that even if it's like madrugada in España, you look very fresh and so enthusiastic and so alive, as if it's daytime there. So anyway, thank you very much.
You are very kind. You're really very kind. I really appreciate it. And if sometime, I mean, if ever in the future you want me to speak about Filipino ivories or something like that, I will be really, I mean, it will be my pleasure as well.